Hello everybody, we are finishing off this week of M Performance cars with perhaps one of the most controversial. This is the BMW Z4 M Coupe, a car which I once owned. Not this specific one, but I did own an example of the breed. Now, I will happily tell most people that the Z4 M Coupe occupies the unique title of being simultaneously the best and worst car that I ever owned. And whether it was best or worst really did depend quite a bit on your mood, and it would often seem its mood as well. Now, quite a bit of time has passed since I sold my car. I mean, I did enjoy it quite a bit. I took it on a 2,500 mile tour of Europe, so I didn't shy away from using it, but among other things, it was an extremely low mile example, so I didn't want to drive it too much, and I also just needed the money, so it had to go. But my time with it was quite interesting. The car was actually originally bought for my stepmother, who wanted sort of a bit of a runabout, and because I am, as you might have guessed, from a very petrol-heady family, it was decided that a 340 horsepower, two-seater sports coupe was the perfect kind of runabout for her. Now, she then started using the car to just go to the shops quite a bit and came to the realization that it was an absolutely terrible car for doing that in. However, the Z4 M Coupe, as much as it's a flawed car, does have quite a few good bits as well, and in this video I want to try and give this car as fair a showing as I possibly can. And I am very grateful to this car's owner, Jack, for bringing it to me today, because he's well aware of my opinion on the car and is still very happy for me to feature it. Now, let's start on the outside, shall we? I think it is pretty fair to say, although subjective as it may be, that the Z4 M Coupe is one of the prettiest cars BMW have ever made. Now, the Z4 M Coupe that I featured earlier in the week is notorious for being divisive in its looks. It's got many sort of unfortunate and unflattering nicknames like the clown shoe, the bread van, the oh my dear god, what the hell is that? This, though, I think is much more universally adored, and rightly so. You can see the fact that BMW actually got some stylists to work on this, and it's real classic sports car proportions. Huge long bonnet, nice sweeping cockpit. It's almost like a modern version of something like an E-Type, really. Helping that connection with that famous Brit as well is the fact that you've got this wonderful naturally aspirated straight six up the front, the venerable S54. Now, in the Z4M, the engine is missing about 20 horsepower from its usual output. No such issues here. This car is putting out the full 343 brake horsepower. If you're watching from America, we always got a little bit more power than you because we were missing one of the catalysts that you were saddled with. My own car was completely unmodified all the way down to the original very long whippy aerial. This car has a couple of fairly subtle modifications. Perhaps the most obvious is the Eisenman exhaust. We believe it to be a catback item, and it does just let that car's engine breathe just a little bit more. However, the real benefit, of course, is that glorious six-cylinder rasp that you get. For some reason, though, this doesn't feel quite as quick in here as the Z4M. Don't know why that is. Very possible that's a placebo effect, because the roads that I was driving on with the Z4M were very narrow indeed. Not that these are particularly wide, but it's just an observation that I want to make. Now, perhaps the biggest issue that I had with my Z4M was the gearbox. This is a ZF unit. This is not the same gearbox that is used in the E46 M3. I don't know if it's exactly the same gearbox as used in the regular Z4, but it's just got such a dual personality. First and second are pretty much awful. Trying to pull away from a standstill with this car is, well, it's an art form, I'll be honest about that. There are only two ways to pull off the line smoothly and easily with the Z4M. You either go hell for leather, or you sort of drive Miss Daisy. There is no in between. If you try and pull off the line sensibly, I would give you a sort of 50-50 chance of kangaroo hopping down the road. This is a car that can make even the most seasoned of drivers look like an absolute rank amateur. However, when you get this car on an open road with a more liberal speed limit and the mood takes you, it transforms into something really quite wonderful. To begin with, this car feels like a special place to be. It's not often that I can say that of a BMW because they are, for the most part, all pretty much the same inside. This one with its, not cramped, but let's say snug cockpit, that fantastic view of that nice long bonnet out the front, which you can actually see, the view out the side of those big wide rear arches. It does really feel like a special thing. Very much a German TVR. That's a comparison I've heard made a lot of times, and I've driven a few TVRs, and I can kind of see that. If you want a car that's a bit like a TVR, but that doesn't, catch fire every time you have it serviced, it's pretty damn good. The Coupe, of course, also has a bit of an added air of practicality about it. The boot is a pretty reasonable size, meaning that this is indeed a wonderful car to tour Europe in. Now, you may or may not have noticed the fact the car is shaking me about quite a bit. Part of that will be the fact that this isn't the world's best paved road. Indeed, the world's best paved road, wherever it is, I can almost assure you, is not in England. However, that is possibly the other big issue with the Z4M. Now, I haven't actually driven a Roadster, but I can't imagine it's dramatically better. For whatever reason, I don't know how they managed it, but BMW, when they made the M, they made a couple of changes to the base car, which would make those of us who enjoy the driving experience quite happy. They ditched the electric steering and they put hydraulic in. They also took off the horrible run-flat tyres that the normal car used and that BMW were developing a bit of a fetish for at the time, and they fitted the car with ordinary 18-inch tyres. Now, this particular car is running on CSL style rims, which are 19s, but I can assure you that's not actually making a massive difference in this case. And somehow BMW managed to make that change and still deliver one of the stiffest, worst riding cars I've ever experienced. It boggles the mind. I don't know quite how they did it or why they did it. There is one conspiracy theory, as it were, and that has to do with the fact that this car is not actually a product of Germany. You see, the Z4M is built in Spartanburg. That'll be Spartanburg in South Carolina. Part of me does think that BMW, when they were looking at building a factory in the USA, did just look for somewhere with the most German sounding name, because, Spartanburg's pretty convincing. If you said to someone, where's that BMW built? And they go, oh, Spartanburg. You would say, oh, yeah, great. Unless you happen to live in the Carolinas, you almost certainly would not have heard of it. To add insult to injury, the hydraulic steering system that M Division fitted to the car didn't really gift it with much feel either, meaning that the helm just doesn't have the response you'd expect from even something like an MX-5, let alone a car costing quite a bit more. Now, the good news is that this being a BMW, there are, of course, many different options for aftermarket suspension. You can put all sorts of different things on here, and if I were to buy one of these again, that would be pretty much the first thing I do, possibly after the exhaust, because this Eisenman system does sound absolutely glorious. And I must say, this car as a whole is a real credit to its owner, and I say that not just because he sat next to me, because we already discussed this. I am going to be as brutal with this car as I like, but it's immaculate. It does not look like it's done 77,000 miles at all. The engine bay is absolutely beautiful, and as a whole, this thing looks just stellar. It really does. One of the other more subtle modifications is the different gear knob that this car has. Now, if you are a big fan of the S54 engine, there's also a couple of maybe minor or perhaps not so minor things about this car that are significant. This is the last car that used that engine in any guise. And so if you want a car that is a bit later, you know, so you can get a 57 plate, you get a 2007 one of these, I think they made them for a little bit longer as well, that means you can have an S54 that is legal to drive in quite a few different places. There are a lot of places around the world now where if you want to buy an earlier E46 M3, you can't enjoy it in your city of choice. Not that this car is really a natural city dweller, but you know, it's a small thing. It might be significant to you. This car also pinches a couple of bits from the fabled E46 M3 CSL. In fact, the steering rack and the front brakes are lifted directly from that car. In all my time with one of these, I never really had a problem with the brakes either. They work fairly well. The pedal's got a little bit of squish to start off with, but it will stop you when you need it to. Although it has the older engine, it's actually got the same engine management system as the E92 M3 and the E60 M5. It's still got a proper limited slip diff, which if you turn the traction control off, will actually do a fairly decent job. However, it's not the sort of car that I would advise if you're keen on tail-out action. It's quite snappy on the limit. Ask me how I know. Really, to pilot this car down a road like this at sort of, well, 5 or 6 tenths today, it's actually very, very enjoyable. And when you get really, really frustrated with it and you absolutely hammer it, it becomes brilliant. You forget all of its little faults and it just becomes about that brilliant engine, the fact that it's a special thing to look out of, it's a special thing to be in, and honestly, when it was parked on my driveway, it just made me smile. It's a wonderful thing. Now, in the last few years, quite a few cars in the M catalogue have gone through the roof in terms of prices. When I owned my Z4M, everybody was predicting that they were going to do the same because it was the last of the S54s, the last naturally aspirated manual M car that you could sort of buy with the 6-cylinder in it. And the fact is that although prices have gone up a little bit, they really haven't changed that much. In fact, if I'd kept my own car, I would have spent far more in servicing it than I would have gained in appreciation. So why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, when these came out, they got a battering from the motoring press. They really, really did. Now, quite a bit of that was deserved, but an equal amount of it was not. The main thing that happened with this car, and is basically the death knell for any sort of sporty car, is when you start comparing it with the Boxster and the Cayman. The mid-engined Porsche sports cars, they are inherently different from this. This, in many ways, is more akin to something like a muscle car. And so that didn't help it at all. It is spiky, it is a bit rough around the edges, it's not the sort of refined thing that you might expect, and in many ways the E46 M3 was a sort of better handling car and could be bought fairly easily and cheaply because they'd already been around for a few years, so that kind of made this almost a little bit pointless. What doesn't help either is that in comparison to the Z4 M Coupe, these seem like a far more common car. What doesn't help these is the fact that in the UK we also got the regular Z4 Coupe. There was, I only found out recently, a normal Z3 Coupe. I previously thought they only did the M as a coupe. Now, the reason that I thought that is because in the UK they did only do the 3M as a coupe. This does, to the untrained eye, look pretty much like a Z4 Coupe, and so you probably think that they're a lot more common than they really are. If you're wondering how you spot one of these, well, it's got the M badges on, but then so do a lot of Z4 3 litres. What this doesn't actually have, or shouldn't have, is a Z4 badge. There are no Z4 badges on this car anywhere, nor should there be. The bonnet has those two pronounced sort of creases in the middle of it, which is again something unique to the M, and the front bumper just has a much sharper profile. It's kind of one of those cars where you sort of look at it and you know that the M is the much sexier version, but you're never quite sure why. It does pull, but yeah, for whatever reason, it just doesn't feel as manic as that Z3. I can't work it out. There's no doubting the health of this engine, and again, perhaps it's just the fact that this car is miles more refined cabin-wise than the 3. I mean, that's really, in many ways, what actually makes it quite frustrating. There's so much that's brilliant and really, really good about the Z4 M Coupe. If you look at torsional rigidity, this car is incredibly stiff. The chassis, because I think they designed it as a roadster and then they just made it stiffer by making it into a coupe, which is the sort of opposite way to how these things normally happen. It's fantastic. It's a brilliant platform to build on. So they never needed to make the suspension so ruddy stiff. It was kind of always destined to be that sort of almost car. But I think there's plenty of things in the aftermarket that if you've always fancied one of these, any problems that it has, you can fix. And the one thing that this has, which in my mind no M3 really ever will, is that sense of occasion. That is a rare thing to find in, well, any car, but a particularly rare thing to find in a BMW. And if you are coming from something like an E46 M3, or you're wondering about how much this costs to run and service and maintain and all that kind of jazz, well, it's going to cost you basically exactly the same as an E46. Some of the parts are bespoke, but all the important oily bits, like nothing on this car is going to faze any mechanic that's seen an E46 before. And so, the Z4 M Coupe, it is a flawed car. It is genuinely flawed. But in my mind, that is what earns it the title of being the German TVR, because a TVR is a ludicrously flawed car. They're also, when they want to be, properly brilliant. And so is this. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed today's video and this week's collection of M cars. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.